Today, on our podcast, Beyond Reality, we are together with a very well-known American researcher in human origins, Mr. Michael Cremo. Besides his recent book, Forbidden Archaeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race, which is about 900 pages full of sources of the hidden history of the human race, his other books are Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, The Forbidden Archaeologist, the Atlantis Rising magazine columns of Michael A. Cremo, Forbidden Archaeology Impact, how a controversial new book shocked the scientific community and became an underground classic, Divine Nature, My Science, My Religion, Academic Papers. Welcome to our podcast. We are reaching you from the country of Göbekli, Turkey. Welcome to our podcast, sir.
Good to be with you, Denise, and all your viewers.
It's a great honor to be with you, and I've been following you for years and your work, and I think you are doing something very essential for humankind, and especially for the past few years, we are understanding that it is not all about we see, but there is something beyond. So it is very important what you are doing, and this is something I wanted to say beginning on our podcast. Thank you for giving this effort for humankind.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Denise. Could I ask how my work first came to your attention?
Oh, okay, of course. I work on, I'm an international lawyer, but I work on neuroscience. I'm a science researcher and quantum physics and mythology and ancient texts at the same time. I'm a bestseller author, writing about all these together, the Vedas and everything in mythology, as I said. So while I was writing, I'm a Sufi, while I was writing about the holy books and the ancient texts, I came up with the idea, with the understanding that history was not given to us the way it was. So I began to dig, and there you were. There you were. And after that, I began to work on your work. And we make TV shows here about this and the hidden history of humankind. So this is how I came to meet you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to me to learn the different ways in which my work is circulating. That's, you could say, part of the research experiment. It's like when I publish a book, it's like sending out a probe to investigate the different pathways by which people acquire knowledge, and it takes them in certain directions. So it's good to have this kind of information. And yes, you're right. Although I speak in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, about archaeological evidence, stones and bones, it leads to things beyond what we can see with our limited human sense perception.
Exactly. As a person who is working on perception of humankind and neuroscience, it is, I'm going to come to that while we are talking, and I'm going to ask you about that. I always think that scientists, we have to have, brain scans of scientists to see if they will admit certain, new cases or new ideas, because sometimes they can be so orthodox in the way they can be so close to new information. And what you talk about at the same time, that's something that we're going to come to. And it is very interesting because in our country, in Turkey, we have come up with Göbekli Tepe. Before that, we had Sumerian, tablets. So there was a lot of, interpretations of the Sumerian tablets, and then came Göbekli Tepe, and now they are talking about something even further, going something further in the history. So we are seeing right now, witnessing that history is changing. So that is why your work actually is now finding evidence from everywhere. I mean, I always say to my viewers, we have been given this human history for about 10,000 to 11,000 years, which is nothing when you compare to the history, the real history that is already there. So while I will begin to ask you questions, may I ask you as a first question, because I have made a lot of research about you, and could you please tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you began to think of all these, how life brought you to be Michael Cremo, and your time in Germany and Europe, because I know that you have traveled there, you have, about the Vedas, I'm going to ask you. Can you please tell us a little bit about your childhood first?
Well, the most significant thing is I was born into a military family.
Yes.
My father was an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. And that meant a few things for me as I was growing up. One thing it meant was a lot of traveling, moving from place to place in the United States and elsewhere. And when I was a teenager, I was living in Germany. So I got exposed to a lot of different worldviews and cultures. I learned, well, the American way is one way, but there are other countries that have other points of view, other cultural backgrounds. So I was influenced in that way. And another thing that influenced me was the idea that there are things about this world that most people aren't aware of. I grew up among people in the intelligence services, and they're dealing all the time with secrets, with things that many people are just not aware of. So that always had some influence on me. And then I would also say that I always had certain basic attitudes and values. Even as a child, I was interested in what is the real truth about something. Am I hearing things correctly? Is what I'm being told the real fact, or is there's something else behind it? And I also had a desire to express myself, to communicate with others. So I had that as well. And I also had a sense of justice, either regarding myself, am I being treated fairly? Am I being properly respected and heard? And that also extends to others as well. Are others getting justice, or are they somehow or other being exploited and misled? So those values and those experiences have combined to make me the person I am today. You mentioned, my travels in Europe. So, when I was 16 years old, during one of my school vacations in Germany, I went to Stockholm in Sweden. And I was a young person then. I was staying in youth hostels, not in fancy hotels or anything like that. So in the youth hostel, I met some European young people who had traveled overland to India and back. And in those days, such things were possible. Today, it's very difficult to travel through those countries in the way that was once possible for some of us. So they told me about their experiences in India, with the Himalayan mountains and the Ganges River, and going to Kashmir and meeting different yogis and mystics. And I became fascinated. I decided I would like to go to that country someday. And eventually I did, of course. So that was my first experience with any desire to become knowledgeable about Indian spirituality. So eventually I became the disciple of a guru from India, and under him, as part of my practice and of what's called bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, I began studying the ancient Sanskrit writings, especially the Puranas, which are the historical and cosmological literature. And in those works, I found accounts of human populations existing on Earth for vast periods of time. Most scientists today believe that human beings like us, anatomically modern humans, first appeared on Earth between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, having evolved from more primitive ape-like creatures. So these Vedic accounts showed that humans have existed on this planet for much longer, far longer periods of time than a couple of 100,000 years. Actually, a human presence goes back many millions of years to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. So that was something completely different than anything I'd ever learned from my teachers in high school or professors at the university. And I wondered, is this just some invention, some mythology, or is there perhaps some factual evidence to back it up? And that's what got me looking into the history of archaeology. In the current textbooks, you won't find any evidence for extreme human antiquity. But if you look, as I did, into the original reports of scientists, archaeologists, geologists, paleontologists, other scientists digging into the earth, you will find many reports of discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints going very, very far back in time. In some cases, as I said, millions of years. So then the question arises, well, why isn't this evidence in the textbooks today? And I concluded it was because of a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. If you have evidence that conforms to the dominant consensus in science about human origins, this evidence will pass through the filter. the knowledge filter. And you'll see it in the textbooks. You'll hear scientists talking about it at their professional gatherings, their conferences. But if there are reports of evidence that radically contradict the dominant consensus, they tend to be filtered out. That means they are forgotten, put aside, sometimes explained away in some very superficial manner, or in some cases there may be actual suppression of evidence. But in general, I'm not talking about a conspiracy theory. I'm talking about something that historians of science and philosophers of science have understood for a long time, namely that theoretical preconceptions can influence how scientists react to evidence that comes to their attention.
Mr. Cremo, there is so much that you have said, and I want to actually contribute to from our perspective. Is one of this about the intelligence case. I wrote in one of my books an anecdote from a Sufi master, Ibn Arabi. He wrote that years and years ago, in the 12th and the 13th century, he wrote that, there was life on Earth, and then they went to Mars. And he said, I have left footprints in Mars. And he said, if you want to find out about the creatures, the living, whatever you call it, extraterrestrials or, humankind living on Mars, he said, search underground, not underground, but search underground. And I always say that, we are like ants. We don't see the other dimensions. Ants see only 2 dimensions. So for them, the 3rd dimension doesn't exist. So they see us as a wall. And you put them on the cover of a book and they begin to go into circles because they do not perceive it. So when you're looking with a telescope to a planet to see if there's somebody there, because of the other dimension they might be, active in, we cannot see. It doesn't matter if it's the highest technology of the telescope. We are limited beings. So unless we are limited, so this is why these Sufi masters, these yogis, they were experiencing something beyond what we call reality. And they were experiencing these other dimensions or whatever it is. And these days, of course, because of psychedelics, medications and stuff like that, and meditations, people do actually perceive certain stuff like that and near-death experiences. So when I wrote this in my book, so, the people were divided into 2. They said, oh, what's she talking about? What about the creatures underground Mars? And some people said, oh, this is interesting. So what did this Sufi master say? And what happened is, after a few years, my book was published and out. His name is Haim Esed from Israel. He was the former Israel space security chief. He made a public announcement in a newspaper saying that the Martians were actually living underground and that President Trump knew this. And he said, you have to look for that. And then, lots of debunkers came out. What is he saying? And this and that. This was very interesting. All my followers saw this because they read it in my book, because I like to learn and I like to be open to ideas because I know I'm very limited. I know neuroscience. I know that I'm just like in an illusionary state. So for me, these are amazing stuff. And that is why I took that into consideration. And then when you are reading the Vedas, when you are reading all these mythologies, especially in India, you see that there were fights among galaxies and planets, and you can see that there was something more there. And you see the same story in every culture, Incas, Mayans, in the Vedics and everywhere. And as a Muslim, as a Sufi, I know that Adam, what we call Adam, was first put in India. So he was landed in India. So this is why for me, the Vedics and India is very important, all that knowledge. But of course, it's being distorted because I believe that it is being purposely distorted, because we are living we are being given this simulation kind of thing, and any kind of new information is just banned. We have seen these from the past events in the United States and in all the world, who fund certain researchers. So that's not our case, but it is not really fair, because I have also listened to you that you were kind of banned from certain conferences. Certain people wanted to reject listening to you. And I don't understand how somebody who can call himself scientist can be so close to what he believes and gets so clinged. This was what they did to Galileo, and they still talk about him, saying, oh, this is what they did to him. And now they are doing this to researchers, scientists like you. Now it's the same thing. So your work in human origins, as you state, is inspired by your studies in the Puranas, which are the historical writings of ancient India. So what about, could you please, because I know how you give, in your book, you give all these sources. How old is the human race? Could you share it with our viewers?
Well, I think it's always existed in the mind of God. According to the Vedic cosmology, time is cyclical. It goes in vast cycles of creation and destruction. So these cycles go on endlessly. During the basic unit of this cyclical time is called the day of Brahma. So the day of Brahma lasts about 4,320,000,000 years. It's followed by a night of Brahma, which lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. And the days and nights of Brahma go on endlessly. So during the days of Brahma, life, including human life, is manifest in the universe, and during the nights, its life, including human life, is dormant. It's like in a sleeping state. When the next day comes, everything becomes active again. So that means the universe actually has a purpose, and that purpose is to allow conscious selves who are at this moment not fit, not qualified to exist in the world of pure consciousness, which is beyond the cycles of creation and destruction. The reason that there is a universe at all, I mean, actually there are millions of universes according to the Vedas, but the reason they are there is they're like an educational facility, a school, and they have two purposes. One is to allow conscious selves to try to enjoy the world of matter, to dominate, control, and exploit it in competition with others who are trying to do the same thing, or to understand, I am a being of pure consciousness. I'm not from the world of matter. I'm from some other dimension of reality, and let me try to qualify myself to enter that other dimension, which is beyond birth and death and creation and destruction and all the influence of material time. So that is the ultimate purpose. And the human form of life is the form in which we can accomplish that. There are many other bodily vehicles, plant vehicles, animal vehicles, insect vehicles, fish vehicles, bird vehicles. The conscious self can occupy any of those types of vehicles according to its desires. So in the human vehicle, we have the opportunity to understand what our situation is and do something about it. So the human form, the human vehicle has always been available for conscious selves in the material world. So there isn't any one beginning of the human species. It's always the human form of body has always been available. So that's quite a different understanding than many people now have. And as conscious beings, we're all extraterrestrials. We're not from the world of matter. We're from another place, the world of pure consciousness or spirit, if we want to use that word.
Oh, I'm so touched. You know, our Sufi master, Ibn Arabi and Rumi, says, you are not from this world. You are just passing from this world. You're just passing. This is like a bridge. So do not make any constructions on this bridge. It is funny, you know, because humankind is trying to like invest in this place that is just a place, a bridge that you are passing. So, and just like you say that we are pure consciousness and we are here to learn that, you know, in Arabic, God is called Rabbul Alameen, which means the teacher of the school of the universe. So we are all here to actually witness ourselves and upgrade ourselves. But we so forget this, that in this dream state, we think this dream is true and we get clinged to this material stuff that we think we see, because it is, again, we see only very little, light, what we call visible light is like a very, very little in the light spectrum. So what we think is reality is just a very little piece of it, and there's so much beyond it. And again, the cyclic universe is what I wrote in my sixth book, actually, because that's what we believe too. Again, Sufi master Ibn Arabi, when he was in Kaaba in Mecca, he was, doing his, he was doing his worship, and then he sees this person who is a bit tall, and he says to him, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am one of the ancestors of Adam." He says, "Who are you? Which Adam are you coming from?" And he says, "What do you mean, which Adam?" He says, "There were more than 100,000 Adams, and it will never last because God has no end, and he has no beginning and no end. He's just eternal. More than like eternal is not even enough to, say, to make a, like a statement about God. So this is all you say is so much resonating with what we believe, because again, he says the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning. That's why the time is a cyclic, like a circle. So the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning. So while I was working on the flood of Noah, of course, we were always thinking that this is my interpretation and this is what I work with my team. We believe that Noah has reached a very high technology. He has reached a very high technology. And that's why he was great in genetics and everything. And it was probably, I mean, a great spaceship kind of thing that they built in that technology. So of course, these things, when you talk in the, either the religious societies or other communities who are like not looking at any kind of, new understanding, of course, it is like very far away. but this is what we believe, and we believe that we have been to Mars before, and now humankind is actually repeating history. So because of the Vedas, we know this too, and it's very important to read the Vedas and the ancient texts all together to understand what has really happened and what will happen in the future, because actually future is our past in a way, because it has happened before. So we can find out from all these texts, which is, I think, very important, just like you mentioned in all of your statements. I would like to ask you about, I have given the examples that you have shared in your book, some of the examples that you have shared in your book, and also in your videos that I have tried to, watch all of them in the broadcasts that I have made in my country, about those, and especially you have also shared that in some museums, they were just like, I don't know what the right word is, concealed or something, Can you please give us some examples of the countries, just like you mentioned in Argentina and Tanzania, these very, very old, like millions of years findings with little, I don't want to get you too tired, but could you give us some examples so we can share this and spread this information with millions of people?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, some of the cases that I really like are, for example, the California gold mine discoveries. These took place during the 19th century when gold was discovered in the mountains of central California. And miners came there to get the gold, and they were digging tunnels into the sides of mountains. And deep inside the tunnels, they were finding human bones and human artifacts, such as obsidian spear points, stone mortars and pestles, things like that. And these were found in layers of rock that modern geologists tell us are about 50 million years old. They're from the early part of the geological period called the Eocene. And these discoveries came to the attention of Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. And he wrote a massive report about them that was published by Harvard University in the year 1880. But we don't hear very much about these discoveries today because of the process of knowledge filtration. There was a contemporary of Whitney's, Dr. William Holmes, who was an anthropologist working at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, the capital of the United States. And Dr. Holmes wrote, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, he wouldn't have announced those conclusions. He wouldn't have published that book. So Holmes was saying, essentially, if the facts don't agree with the dominant theory, then those facts shouldn't be published. He should have known it's impossible for humans to have existed that far back in time. Now, some of those artifacts are still in the collection of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. They're not displayed to the public, but I got permission from the directors of the museum to study and photograph them. And I presented a paper about them at a meeting of the World Archaeological Congress. So, that paper is included in my latest book, My Science, My Religion. So there are many other cases like that. In Portugal, there was another case where a geologist, Dr. Carlos Ribeiro, discovered human artifacts, again in the 19th century, that were about 20 million years old. And he displayed these artifacts in the Museum of Geology in Lisbon with labels indicating an age of about 20 million years. Now, after he died, his colleagues in the museum said, we can't have these things here. 20 million years, that's impossible. Maybe 20,000 years, that's okay. So they wrote new labels for the artifacts. They left them on display, but they wrote new labels for them, giving them young ages of about 20,000 years. And then the next generation of officials in the museum just put the entire collection away so that nobody could see it anymore. And I think I'm the first researcher to see them in over 50 years. Unless you're someone like me who really looks carefully into things, you wouldn't even suspect that such things existed. But they are there. And things like that continue to be found up to the present day, but sometimes, in many cases, the scientists don't realize what they're finding. They just try to explain it in terms of their standard ideas. Like, I'll give you one example. In one case, they discovered a couple of years ago, in 2016, at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, a finger bone. Actually, it's this bone here, the bottom bone of the little finger. So it's pretty insignificant in the sense that it's just a little finger bone. But they studied it very carefully. They measured it. And then as scientists, they have statistical analysis software that they apply. And they compared the shape of the bone using multivariate statistical analysis with the shape of the same finger bone in different species of apes and monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas. And they also compared it with the same bone in fossil species of what they call hominins, what they believe to be human ancestors, like Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and others. And then they also compared it with anatomically modern human finger bones, the same finger bone in anatomically modern humans. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this discovery was made in a formation 1,800,000 years old. So in their analysis, the archaeologists found that the OH84 finger bone, that was their specific label for it, OH84 means Olduvai hominid number 84. So they concluded it fits in the modern human group. But they said in their scientific report published in Nature Communications, they said, we can't call it Homo sapiens because of its geological age. 1,800,000 years old. So they were actually looking at the evidence. They said, okay, we've got this finger bone. It's 1,800,000 years old. It's exactly like an anatomically modern human finger bone. It's different than any ape or monkey or hominid finger bone, but we can't call it human because it's too old. But I would say, why not? Why not admit, yes, if humans like us had been living at that time and they left a skeletal remain of that little bone, that's exactly what it would look like. So at least we should be able to admit the possibility of these things. And this kind of thing was recognized by a famous philosopher of science. His name was Kuhn, and he wrote, Thomas Kuhn, and he wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in which he made this point that scientists operate according to paradigms. In other words, sets of conclusions and methods that a particular scientific discipline has, and things that fit the paradigm are recognized and publicized, but things that don't fit the paradigm are put aside, dismissed. And he pointed out that scientists tend to see what they expect to see. And there was a very interesting psychological experiment that showed that. Kuhn cites it in his book. In this experiment, researchers took a deck of cards, an ordinary deck of playing cards, and they changed some of the cards in the deck. For example, if you have 6 of hearts, normally it's red. They turned it black. So you have a black 6 of hearts. So they did that to some of the cards, other cards in the deck. And then they would show the cards one at a time to the people they were testing. They would show the card, and the person, the subject of the experiment, would have to identify the card. Ace of hearts, king of spades, and then they show them the altered card, the 6 of hearts that was black. And they say 6 of spades. In other words, they can't recognize it for what it is. No one would stop and say, wait a minute, something appears to be out of the ordinary with that card. No, it should be red. It's like, but nobody does that. They just see it in terms of what they expect to see. So that goes on. So as I said, some of these discoveries continue to be made, but they're not recognized for what they really are.
Eric Weinstein, he says that scientists are not free because they need fundings and they cannot, research about the things that are not getting funding. So that is something, that is why, they just rush to one field that there is quote unquote money, and then,
Yes.
and they cannot, like we work on dreams, because all these things that you say resonate with me. We know how the brain works. Brain makes predictions, and it doesn't see what's out there. It is just making predictions to keep you alive. And So, for example, as a lawyer also, I know that witnessing is something that you can never trust, because when you ask a person, how did you hit the car? That word that you used even manipulates the way he perceives the event. If you say, how did it smash the car? Then he thinks that the car was going in a faster speed rather than using hit. So you use these tricks. You know that the tricks of, how you are limited. Yeah, so you can just change the perception of a person. And this is why when I was also reading about, Kuhn, because of I was reading about the paradigms, and you mentioned about Kuhn and that work that you have shared, and I was because it resonated with me, because as a neuroscience researcher, I know these, and this is so true. You can manipulate everything, and the person does that, willingly. He wouldn't even know that he is being manipulated. So, but as you said, I find this naive in the way that, yes, their expectations were, oh my God, it cannot be 20 million years. Oh, so what about human history? But I again, as to mention, I don't believe it is all naive. I see a covering also action to keep people away from these, so that people go on with this worldly, earthly life, that they think they're going to get distinguished, that they are mortal. Right now, biologists and all these people are looking for immortality, which you are already immortal. You're a conscious being. So you just changed your clothes. This body goes and another body comes. So that is the cover of your consciousness. So your experience never ends, because you are immortal. But they are saying to people, do you want to be immortal? We can freeze you, we can do this, we can do that, which, we never die. We just taste death. So I so resonate with all the things that you say. And I again, as I said, I so respect you and your work. And I think you are an amazing person. And you are so wise, which is something that is not found very often, because you might have knowledge, but wisdom is something else. Wisdom is something that is to see what's beyond what we see. So when you are talking about and writing about all these evidences in your books, and this I think taboo of Darwin, that we come from apes and everything, so this will go away, and what will happen to the scientific community who is built on these fundamentals? It's going to be, oh my God, an explosion. So this is why people are covering this information. But for example, as to the ancient texts, the mythologies, and also like Quran that I work on, for example, in Quran, you see that it is talking about past, present, and future at the same time in one verse, meaning time is for us, not for God consciousness. It is for us. It is a perception. So as long as we are in this Tesla suit that I call this Tesla suit. So could it be, do you think that it can be our either, for example, ancestors, and also our, for example, grandsons and granddaughters that can be in other galaxies that are, we know that in the United States for the past few months, especially, it is the UFO stuff is going on. I'm joining some rooms on Clubhouse. They're talking about this. We know that there are extraterrestrials. We are also extraterrestrials, just like you mentioned. We are not from this world, of this world. We're just passing from this world. So do you think it could be our ancestors or our, grandsons? Because I believe that time travel even can be possible when we reach the technology they have reached in the history, millions of years ago, maybe. Do you think it could be these ancestors who are visiting us from other galaxies? They have maybe left Earth for a while and come back. And what is your perception about UFOs and all these things that we see? They say they see.
Well, you've said quite a bit, Denise, and I'd like to go back to what you started
Please.
with, which is that you see that there is some active suppression going on, and I think you're right about that. I think there are forces in the world that are trying to control our sense of identity. If, for example, if I identify myself as an American man, then I behave like that. It shapes my values, my goals, my activities, so if scientists today are successful in their attempt to get us to identify as machines made of molecules, as purely material beings, which is what they're trying to do in the education systems that they control all over the world today. They are trying to define us as simply another kind of animal, an evolved ape, a purely material being, a machine made of molecules. If we accept that self-identification, if that becomes our identity, then we will think that to produce and consume more and more material things is the main purpose of human life. Our goals and values will become very materialistic. I think, yes, that's our purpose, to enjoy, produce, consume in competing groups, in competition with others for survival on this planet. And what kind of world do we get from that? We get a world where you have conflict on every level of human society. You have the environment and all its resources being consumed in an unsustainable way. And you get the kind of world that we actually have. But if people had another set of another sense of identity, that would lead to a different set of values, goals, and objectives. For example, if all our educational institutions were giving us the idea we are all beings of pure consciousness, there's no need to divide ourselves into so many competing groups. We can solve our material problems. We can satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, efficient, and fair way possible, and put most of our human energy into developing the resource of consciousness. It would be a different kind of civilization with different kinds of values and goals. Now, I believe there are forces in society today that don't want to see that. These are the forces who are benefiting from having, the world's 6 or 7 billion people all working to produce and consume as much as possible in their different competing groups, which may be based on nationality or race or religion or what, there's so many divisions. So that process of material production and consumption generates wealth. So those who are in control of the system, they like to keep it like that. So I would say that is one of the motives lying behind this commitment, this unwavering commitment of modern science to its materialist paradigm that rules out any kind of non-material substance, the idea that consciousness may be something different than matter. So I think you're right about that. I agree with you on that point. I just wanted to make that clear. And as far as UFOs are concerned, the Puranas have elaborate descriptions of different kinds of flying craft that could go from planet to planet and dimension to dimension. So, yes, I accept that there are flying craft based on different technologies, different from our current technology. In the Sanskrit literature, different kinds of vimanas or spacecraft are described. Some are made of ordinary material elements, but that's the grossest kind. There are some that are manifested by yogic powers, by subtle powers. In other words, today, if with our present technology, we want to build an aircraft or a spacecraft, we have to mine the earth for ores of metals. We have to refine the ores. Then we have to get the metal and bring it to a factory and put it together with other pieces of metal and plastic. There's a whole procedure for manufacturing something. But these yogis and mystics were able to manifest things by their mental energies. So it's a more subtle kind of technology than we're familiar with today. And I would say that a lot of our modern technology is our attempt to reproduce abilities that conscious beings once had naturally. For example, the ability to speak and see distant things. In the Puranas, there are descriptions of different mystic powers. One of them is called Durshravana, the ability to hear things at a distance, a great distance, and Durdarshana, the ability to see things that are happening a great distance away. So actually, the Indian national television network is called Doordarshan, after this power, see at a distance. So just like here on this Zoom platform, we're hearing and seeing each other at a great distance. I'm in Los Angeles, you're in Turkey somewhere. I don't know what city exactly, but you're there. But the modern attempts to replicate this are based on exploiting it for profit. So
beautiful. As a Sufi, we always say that if you are looking for a time machine, it is you already. So what you have to do is enhance those limits on your senses, do your retreats, work on yourself, be a better person, and go inside and stop being stimulated by the outside world that you think it is out there, but try to go inside and find out the universe, the galaxies within yourself, so that you can move faster than light and everything, because these are the limits on the perceptions and the senses. So that is why we think that we are limited. We are put in this cage that we call this body, this box. Mm-hmm. But what's within well, what is using this box is limitless. So we have forgotten that because we are being so much stimulated that we don't have time during the daytime. You don't have time to think about these things. That's why, you know, you had the chance, you went after this to go to India and look for what's going on there and try to find yourself. You followed your senses, you followed your instincts, you followed your heart, actually, and then came to this wisdom, which is so, you know, so I so admire it. So what would your, for example, when we are reading Plato, he's talking about Atlantis and that there were these civilizations before us that, you know, we believe that there was a change in the poles, and then this happened, you know, in a cyclic way again, and the seas became the deserts, or the lands, and the lands became the seas, and all these structures, all these buildings, they changed places. What is your perception about the Atlantis issue, the Mu issue, and about Egypt and the pyramids?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Plato in this connection. In his dialogue, Timaeus, Plato explains how the Greek political philosopher Solon went to Egypt, and he was speaking with some Egyptian priest about the history of the Greek people. And he described how, yes, there were originally some people living, and then there was a big devastation, a flood. And after that, there was a first person named Deucalion and his wife, who were given the task of repopulating the earth. And so that's how they come to the present. And the Egyptian priest told Solon, well, that's not your entire history. There have been a whole series of devastations going back very, very far in time, and you've only got information about the last one. But we have records of your people's history through many of these devastations that take place in the course of cyclical time. So, yes, that is something that I also accept. As far as Atlantis, Mu, and other such things are concerned, the basic principle is that these were advanced civilizations that were located on islands or continents that are now beneath the ocean waves. They are underwater, they've been flooded. So in India, you have some similar accounts, like the city of Dwarka, which was the city of Krishna, who is in the Puranas recognized as the supreme being. It was his city. And about 5,000 years ago, it went under the water. So there's still, to this day, a city called Dwarka on the coast of northwestern India in the Gujarat state. And offshore from that present city of Dwarka, marine archaeologists have found the remains of an ancient city under the water there. So it's a similar account. In southern India, they have the idea of a place called Kumari Kandam, which is part of the Indian subcontinent that they say existed thousands of years ago, but now it's underwater. It's no longer visible. So you have, yes, the accounts of Atlantis and Lemuria and Mu, but it's also reflected in a lot of the world's cultures. And actually today, marine archaeology is becoming very important because archaeologists understand that over the past 20,000 years or so, the ocean levels have been rising. During the height of the glacial periods, much of the water in the ocean was on the land in very thick layers of ice. So there are still ice sheets, vast ice sheets covering Antarctica and Greenland and some mountaintops in some countries. So, but for the past 20,000 years, those ice sheets have been melting. So the water is going up, covering land areas that were once inhabited. So even in terms of modern Orthodox science, they understand that there are vast areas of land that were once populated that are now underwater.
I'm also a script writer, and I'm writing, yes, also a musician as well. So I'm writing about all these, integration of all these fields, neuroscience, quantum physics, and mythology, and religious texts at the same time about Mu, Atlantis, and also Egypt, because when you look at these pyramids, that you see that they are much older than actually they are telling us, because they have been made changes on these pyramids. And when you look at them, for example, you see the planet Nibiru, which is, I heard one of the recent scientists from NASA a few weeks ago that there is a planet X, planet 9, that they call in the solar system. They can only detect that because of the gravitational field of it. They cannot see it, but he believes that's Nibiru. So you see that in these, ancient carvings and all these things, that these people knew astronomy better than us. When you look at the Dogons, for example, I know there were some, debunkers about the Dogons, but they knew Sirius, the star Sirius, before us. And when you look at them, they look so primitive, but they know so much more than us, just like the Aborigines, who can speak like in a telepathic way, and that, just like you mentioned, remote viewing and everything. So technology is not about being criminal to this iPhone, that when the charge is over or when the battery is over, you are just finished. They have reached such states that they knew about the stars and galaxies that we don't know of yet, because we are limited already, and also we are talking on the visible universe that we are, that we think we know, and every day something new comes up, and we understand that we know very little about the galaxies and the universe and even our solar system, and we are also limited. So how can we be so arrogant to say that we know it all? So this is why I think it's very important to be a polymath, to be in neuroscience, to be in quantum physics, but also in the ancient texts, the Vedas, Mahabharata, and all these texts, because they are talking about these fights, just like the Star Wars, the movie. You can see it. I think it was Mahabharata that these galaxies and these creatures from all these galaxies and planets were fighting with each other. So and you see it all around the world in every culture. In Quran, you see this too. You see how such a high technology these prophets were, when they are talking about the prophets, when the book is talking about the prophets, they have reached such high technology. So just like you mentioned, you know, for me, Mulan and Atlantis is very essential issue, and also Egypt, because I know that Hermes is also a prophet, which we call Idris. He knew so much about, he didn't eat for 16 years. He just, did his mantras and everything, just like he was a Sufi master, a prophet. So he saw all those galaxies that we couldn't get hold of. And then he came back to teach the Egyptians. He traveled all around the world. So in certain, cultures, they call him Thoth, they call him Enoch, they call him Idris, they call him Hermes. But you are reading the same thing from all around the world. And still they are saying that they're not taking these texts into consideration, or they are manipulating the scripts, So what is your, for example, what is it that you are working on right now, or you are wondering about right now, these days, or the past few months, or in the near future, that you think that is intriguing you? What is your next step, Mr. Cremo?
Well, for one thing, I'm starting to move around again to give public lectures. I haven't been able to do that for the past 2 years, but this last weekend I went to Sedona, Arizona, which is a very magical place, and gave a talk there. And there are, in the United States, the Native Americans, the tribal peoples who were originally here. So some representatives of different Native American Indian tribes, Hopi and Zuni, were present at this conference where I gave a talk, and I find their views really fascinating, because they were talking about the same kinds of things that you and I are talking about, you from a standpoint of Sufi masters, and from my standpoint, the Vedic teachings and masters. And they also have their traditional wisdom systems that are very similar to what we're talking about. Of course, there's also some difference, but I take that to be a sign that we're looking at the same reality, the same reality, but from different perspectives. Like, if you look at a mountain, somebody is looking from the east, somebody is looking from the west, somebody from the north, somebody from the south. So their descriptions of what they perceive are going to be similar. It's obvious they're talking about the same thing, but still some differences are going to be there because of their different perspectives. So that's something I hope to continue to develop, an appreciation for the commonalities among different wisdom traditions. That's something I find that I would like to pursue.
I'm hoping to see you in Turkey. I'm hoping to host you in Turkey, because there is so much history here. Maybe there's so much that you have never been to Turkey, right?
I have been.
You have been.
I think at least twice.
Twice. Where have you been to? Istanbul?
Well, I mean, this is a long time ago
Uh-huh.
when I was a young person interested in traveling to India. So once I came to Istanbul and I traveled by boat from Istanbul to Trabzon, Black Sea coast, and then from Trabzon to Erzurum, and then from Erzurum across to Tabriz.
Oh my God.
And another time I came to Turkey by boat and I went to Izmir and then to Istanbul. And I've been to a few places and I've heard of some very interesting sites in Turkey. Of course, as you mentioned, Göbekli Tepe is now very much on people's minds. And I think there was another place that I heard about recently, Den Kudu. It's a place where there are underground.
The very recent ones, right? Very recent ones?
Underground.
Cappadocia?
Yeah, Cappadocia.
Cappadocia. I'm hoping you would come. Yes,
yes. Tunnels.
There are so many tunnels, underground
18 levels of underground tunnels that could keep up to 40,000 people. They had storerooms, living spaces.
Yes.
Just amazing. I heard about these things, but I would like to see them. There's also a case that I'm investigating of some very ancient footprints that were found at a site in Turkey where they were building a dam or some type of project. So there were some engineers and other people working there, and they found in the rock, anatomically modern human footprints. I'm going to include that case in my next book, which is called Extreme Human Antiquity. I've finished the manuscript for it, and it should be out soon, hopefully before the end of the year.
Yeah, Mesopotamia there's every day they are doing something new, they're finding something new, and it is really very exciting after Göbekli Tepe. And Klaus Schmidt actually was the one who made Göbekli Tepe so famous. It's a German archaeologist, but he suddenly died away. And some conspiracy theorists said that he found something that shouldn't be found, like suppressed and stuff like that. So, but after that, Göbekli Tepe is like, all these tourists, either from, in the country or out of the country, are traveling to see. And because an eye and wisdom like you, I don't know what you would see. It's very interesting because the way we have learned is when the earth was first formed, in the very first form I'm talking about, is that there were other beings living on this world, and then these sometimes underground structures can be very small, very interesting. So you might think that, are they human, or who? I mean, you cannot know sometimes who they are made for. And then after that, humankind and what we call, according to the book, Adam, and Adam was created, but after that humankind was here in the earth, and then everything of course proceeded, and it came to these states. And of course there's a cyclic way that is going on. So it is I'm hoping that you have, because the footprints you give the examples of in your book and also in your conferences are very interesting. I think in one of them you were talking about something about Gulf of Mexico, where the Jurassic period, it was like so old, like 150 million years or something like that, if I'm not wrong. I'm remembering, because I have noted all the things that you have shared, but it's not easy to keep up with them because you have given so much source. And I'm hoping that your work reaches millions of people. And I believe that this pandemic actually has become an opportunity for some people to question what reality is, what life is. And that is why, yes, you couldn't travel for the past maybe 1.5 years, but I believe that there's more enlightenment in the way people look at things that you are going to share. Because it's the same in my country too. These things, when we were talking about, there were, as I said, there people were dividing into two. Oh, what is this? What is this? Or the other ones, oh, interesting. But now people are thinking, they're questioning, and they don't believe the things that they used to hear before. Now they are saying there is something beyond what we see. And just like these forces are banning us from finding out who we really are, and it's time to wake up, actually.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful.
So, is there anything else you would like to share with us before we say, with a sad, attitude, goodbye to you?
Well, I'm very happy that I have had this opportunity to discuss these things with you, Denise, and I'm looking forward to coming to Turkey sometime, as you're proposing, if that can be arranged.
Yes,
that would be good.
Yes.
But as far as what I would like to see in the future is, I would like to see some changes in the educational system, because I don't think that one group of scientists, even if they're the majority, should be given a monopoly in the education system. I think in countries that consider themselves democratic, support freedom of thought and freedom of expression, that all the diversity that's actually there in the scientific world should be represented in the education system. There are scientists and researchers who have different ideas than the majority has. So I think the proper solution is let the mainstream majority group have the most pages in the textbook, the most time for presenting their views in the classroom, but let there be in the textbooks some pages, some few pages that acknowledge, but there are others who have different ideas, and then let the students make up their own minds about these things. I think that would be progress in the education system.
I think even if we don't want to, even if they don't let us learn from the educational worldly system, I think consciousness, God, I think the universe also wants us to learn. So it teaches us in his own method to find out about ourselves. Because I always say, yes, there are schools in this world, but do you think there are not schools in God's school? So there are not teachers in God's school? So I think this pandemic especially has become a great teacher for people to question their life, that they were on, autopilot. Now they have began to think, they have began to look inside, and they have began to question all these mainstream things that we have been taught, that became suspicious in a way. So I don't believe in we can find democracy in the world, because as a person who reads all these ancient texts and, you know, holy books, I know that there are two forces in this world. One is evil, one is light, one is good. So as long as there's, you know, that there's a fight like this, we have to, once we understand that there's a fight, we have to search for these kinds of knowledges, informations. We have to go after them. Otherwise, nobody will give us them on a tray like that. Oh, here you are. Just look at these two. Nobody would do that. And once you understand this fight, then you begin to understand the scenario of life. And this is why I think people like you, who is a light worker, is very important to understand. And you always give sources in your work. You are a science researcher. You are doing a scientific work. So I would suggest to all of my followers or of my readers, viewers from all around the world, if they have not had the chance to meet you, because it is not our opportunity, it's not an opportunity given to, it is our honor to host you on this podcast, somebody like you. And I'm hoping all of our viewers begin to follow you and read your work and follow your new sharings, so that they can support this person who is really putting so much effort for the sake of humanity, who is doing this for the good of sake of humanity. It is very rare to find people like you these days. Thank you so much, Mr. Cremo.
Okay, Denise, I agree with you that there are alternative channels by which knowledge from the sources of light can be distributed. But I'm still hopeful that some of the existing institutions can be changed in some fashion. So, but yes, this is my classroom.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cremo.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you to all of you who have watched this video. Please follow Mr. Cremo, Mr. Michael Cremo, and all his great effort. In his books, you can find a lot of very interesting points. Please do follow him and write to him and read all his work, because he is someone who is really worth to follow. And you will never regret after reading his work, and you will really have another window opening to the reality beyond reality understanding. Thank you all.